My daughter abandoned her disabled son. But 20 years later she kneels before us to reunion but them she. I was 60 years old the night my daughter left her baby on my porch like a piece of unwanted furniture. I remember the sound before anything else, the sharp, slicing screech of tires grinding against the gravel road that cuts in front of my house. It was 2 in the morning, the kind of hour when even the Tennessee crickets fall quiet, the kind of hour when only trouble comes knocking. I pushed myself out of bed, every joint protesting, and hurried to the front door because something in my chest already knew it was her. When I opened the door, the porch light flickered once, then held steady. That was when I saw the basket first. An old wicker thing, frayed at the edges, the kind you find at yard sales for $1. Inside it was a newborn, tiny, red, trembling, still wearing a hospital band around his wrist, and on top of the thin blanket, weighed down so it would not blow away, was a crumpled $100 bill. I stared for a moment without breathing, then lifted my eyes. Sarah stood under the porch overhang, arms folded tight across her chest, as though shielding herself from responsibility rather than the cold drizzle misting down around us. Her face looked carved from stone, hard, unyielding, younger than her cruelty deserved. "What are you doing?" I whispered, my voice cracking like dry wood. I already knew, but the mother in me still begged for the answer to be something else, anything else. Sarah flicked her wrist toward the basket, as if presenting a bill at a restaurant. "I only have $100 for it. Do whatever you want with him." Her tone was flat, almost bored, as though we were discussing a stray kitten instead of the life she'd just carried into the world. My throat tightened. "Sarah, baby, this is your son." She rolled her eyes so sharply it was almost theatrical. "He is defective, Mother. They told me at the hospital. Something is wrong with his legs. I am not ruining my life for a broken child," she said, broken, like it tasted sour in her mouth. I stepped closer, shielding the basket with my body instinctively. "He needs love, Sarah. He needs you." "No," she snapped, shaking her head with sudden violence. "He needs someone who has nothing better to do. Someone like you. You can spend your retirement wiping drool and pitying yourself. I am not doing it." I had never felt coldness like the one that rose inside my chest then, not the cold of the weather, but the cold of understanding that my daughter had crossed a line she would never come back from. I opened my mouth to speak again, but she cut me off with a sharp laugh, bitter and metallic. "Do not start preaching," she said. "You chose your sad little life. I am choosing mine. And it does not include that thing." She pointed at her own child without a tremor in her fingers. Around that moment, while I stood between a helpless baby and the woman who birthed him, something in me trembled. Not from fear, but from the weight of the choice she was leaving in my hands. The injustice of it, the sheer cruelty, swelled inside me like a storm. And if you listening out there feel that justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive and echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much, and keep listening. Sarah turned away as though none of this mattered. She pulled open her car door, tossed her hair back the way she always did when she wanted the world to admire her, and looked at me over her shoulder for the final blow. "He is yours, from this moment on." "I am done." The engine roared, headlights slicing across the wet gravel. "Do not call me. Do not tell anyone he is mine." Then she slammed her door and sped off, spraying muddy water over the porch steps, her taillights shrinking into the black road until they vanished completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than the night air. I knelt down beside the basket, my knees popping and aching, and lifted the tiny boy into my arms. His skin was hot against my chilled hands. He let out a weak, confused cry, the kind that pierces straight through a woman's ribcage and settles in her soul. I pressed him against my chest, my breath shaking. "Hush, sweetheart," I whispered. I have you now." The $100 bill slid off the blanket and drifted to the porch floor. I picked it up with trembling fingers, not because of what it was worth, but because of what it represented, the price my daughter placed on a human life. "I am so sorry," I murmured into the soft fuzz of his hair. "You deserved more. You deserved a beginning, not an abandonment." And standing there on that weather-beaten porch, holding a life my own child had discarded, I made a promise I would not break. No matter what she does, you will never be unwanted again. I was 19 when I brought Sarah into the world, too young to understand how heavy a baby could feel once life stopped being romantic and started being real. I worked the kind of jobs people only notice when they want to judge you for them. Washing cars until my fingers cracked, cleaning motel rooms that reeked of other people's mistakes, stocking shelves at the night market while everyone else slept. I told myself it was temporary, that I would find something better, that I would climb my way out of the hole life handed me. But the truth was simple and cruel. When you start at the bottom with no one to help you, climbing feels like crawling through mud. Sarah grew up watching me come home in uniforms that smelled of detergent or engine grease, and even when she was still a little girl, I could see the embarrassment bloom behind her eyes like a bruise. Children do not hide their shame, especially not when other children help them shape it. The girls from the nice part of town, the ones with iron dresses and mothers who volunteered at fundraisers, would laugh when they saw me waiting at pickup. They covered their noses playfully and whispered just loud enough for my daughter to hear. "Your mama smells like a mechanic," they said. "Your mama works with dirty men." And one girl, a little older, declared with the brutal honesty only children have, "You are the kid from the cheap house." Sarah never repeated their words to me in those early years, but she did not have to. I could see them settling into her bones. She would tug her hand from mine as soon as we stepped outside the school gates. She walked 2 steps ahead, so it would not look like she belonged to me. She stopped calling me Mama in public by the time she was 9, switching to Nancy like I was a neighbor she barely trusted. When she turned 13, the simmering embarrassment turned into something sharper. The first time she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You make me ashamed." I did not answer. Shame is a hard word to swallow from the mouth you once fed with your own hands. She threw more at me as she got older. "If you knew how to keep a man," she snapped one night, "we would not live like this." She said it so casually, as if my divorce and the years of trying to survive afterward were deliberate choices meant to inconvenience her. I wanted to tell her about the nights I stayed awake, worrying how to pay the next bill, about the times I ate less so she could eat more, but she never wanted the truth. She wanted someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. As she grew into a teenager, she discovered she had beauty the way some people discover a weapon. She learned that a smile could get her rides home and attention from boys whose families owned lake houses and land they never worked on. She wanted that life shiny, empty, effortless. When one of those boys invited her to a party at his parents' estate, she stood in the doorway in a dress she could not afford and said, "Do not pick me up tonight. I do not want them to see you." She did not say why. She did not have to. The words sat between us like a slap that had not yet landed. What cut deeper than anything else was that she never tried to rise above where we were. She despised poverty, but refused to lift a finger to escape it. She hated the jobs I worked, but never sought a job of her own. Instead, she drifted from one wealthy man to another, chasing status without earning stability. She believed the world owed her comfort and that any hardship was a personal insult. Her double standards grew darker as she entered adulthood. She would sneer at people who worked with their hands but brag about dates who paid her bills. She looked down on women who struggled yet accepted gifts she did not earn. She wanted the privileges of wealth without the discipline or decency of those who built it honestly. To her, character mattered less than appearances, and dignity was optional as long as the world watched her with admiration. I saw the transformation happen slowly, like mold creeping under a doorframe. She stopped visiting unless she needed money. She lied about small things to avoid responsibility. She rejected every reminder of her roots, even the ones that had kept her alive. And whenever she spoke to me, there was always the same bitter refrain. "You kept me small," she said. "You kept me poor. You made my life harder." Not once did she acknowledge the sacrifices that held her childhood together. By the time she was a grown woman, her resentment had matured into something sharper, more poisonous. She was determined to outrun the version of herself she thought I represented. And in her mind, the fastest way to escape was to cut away anything that reminded her of where she came from, even if it meant cutting away the mother who had carried her, fed her, protected her, and loved her with everything she had. So when Sarah abandoned her own child, 20 years later, it was not sudden. Cruelty does not appear fully formed. It grows, it deepens, and eventually it becomes the only language a person knows. And by then, it had become the only language my daughter knew. The morning after Sarah abandoned her son on my porch, I placed that crumpled $100 bill in a small wooden box I kept on my dresser. It was an old box, the kind with a loose hinge and a faint smell of cedar, something my mother had given me long before life became so complicated. I laid the bill flat inside it, smoothing the creases with my fingers, not for the money but because I knew one day I might need to remember exactly how little my daughter believed her child was worth. That box became a quiet reminder of the line that had been drawn between cruelty and responsibility. And I carried it with me through every stage of Evan's life. Raising him was not easy, and I would be lying if I said I never had moments when fear felt heavier than hope. Evan's legs did not develop the way they should have. His muscles were tight, his balance was poor, and he could not stand without help. The doctors explained it gently, but the words still landed like blows. Physical therapy, weekly appointments, braces, surgeries. They listed it all with polite sympathy. I nodded, holding my grandson close, promising myself I would not allow him to become another casualty of someone else's selfishness. We began therapy when he was barely old enough to sit up on his own. I brushed my hair back, tightened my shoes, and carried him through those hospital hallways twice a week. I held his tiny hands while therapists worked on stretching his legs, coaxing his muscles to move in ways that made him cry out in frustration. Every moment hurt him and healed him at the same time, and every tear he shed broke me in ways I never let him see. I learned to count my breaths, one for him, one for me. Until the session was over, money was always tight. The kind of tightness that made you decide between paying a bill on time or buying the better brand of pain medication. But I managed. I worked hours that stretched long into the night and woke before dawn. I cooked meals that lasted for days. I cut corners until there were none left to cut. Evan never knew that part. I made sure of it. A child should not feel the weight of survival on his small shoulders. That burden was mine. People in town had opinions, as people always do. Some of them quiet, some of them loud enough to sting. A neighbor once said, "Your daughter was right to leave him. Better to walk away early than suffer for years." Another told me, "That boy is going to be nothing but work. You should give him to the state." And someone else, someone who had watched me struggle with groceries, added, "You do not have to play the martyr. No one would blame you if you let someone else take over." I did not argue with them. I did not shout or curse or defend myself. I only pulled Evan closer and walked away. They did not understand that he was not a burden. He was my chance to do something right in a life full of wrong turns and disappointments. Holding him made me feel stronger than all their judgments combined. As he grew older, his smile grew with him. It was bright and gentle, the kind of smile that shone, even when his body betrayed him. His first steps came at age 5, shaky and unsteady, with braces strapped tight to his legs and sweat dripping from his brow. I held my breath the entire time, afraid that if I exhaled, he would fall. And when he finally made it across the living room, arms trembling, face lit with triumph, I cried harder than he did. I taught him kindness the same way I taught him to steady his feet slowly, patiently, with repetition. "People will judge you before they know you," I told him. "So let your goodness speak louder than their assumptions." He listened. He absorbed every word. Evan became the kind of child who shared his toys freely, who comforted other kids when they fell, who thanked every nurse after every appointment. His heart stayed soft, even while life tried hard to harden it. I never spoke badly about Sarah to him. Even when he asked about his mother, even when he sensed the missing piece in his life, I refused to give him the bitterness he deserved to hear. "Your mother is searching for herself," I always said. "Sometimes people get lost before they get found." I hated those words, but I gave them to him anyway, because children deserve hope, even if it is fragile. Evan grew into a young man with resilience carved into his bones. He learned to move with grace, despite the scars on his legs. He learned to communicate with compassion, despite the silence of the woman who should have loved him. And every time he called me Grandma, with a warmth Sarah never gave me, I felt my heart stitch itself back together piece by piece. I raised him with the love his mother rejected, and in doing so, I learned something unexpected. Love, when poured into the right soul, does not drain you, it fills you. Evan became the reason I woke up with purpose, the reason I kept going, even when the world whispered that I should give up. He saved me just as much as I saved him. 20 years passed before Sarah ever set foot on my property again. I had grown older in that time, slower in my joints, wiser in my silence. Evan had grown into a young man with steady hands and a determined spirit, a man who had earned every bit of strength inside him. I never expected Sarah to return, not after everything she had chosen to become. But life has a way of sending ghosts back when they run out of places to hide. It was late afternoon when I heard gravel crunch under tires, the same sound that had haunted me since the night she abandoned her first child. I was standing at the kitchen counter, washing the last dish from lunch, when Evan peeked out the window and froze in place. "Grandma," he said quietly, "there is someone outside." His voice carried confusion, not fear, because he did not know yet what fear felt like coming from your own flesh and blood. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the front door, and opened it just as Sarah stepped out of her car. I almost did not recognize her at first. Her beauty, the weapon she had always relied on, had begun to dull around the edges. Her clothes were stylish but worn, her hair too perfect for someone with sincerity in her heart. And her eyes, those eyes, scanned my porch, my garden, the siding of my house, taking mental inventory the way a person does when they are calculating whether someone's life turned out better than theirs. I watched her gaze move from the fresh paint to the new gutters to the rocking chair Evan bought me last Christmas. She was not looking for me. She was looking for an opportunity. Then, in the most dramatic gesture I had seen from her since adolescence, she fell to her knees. Not slowly, not gracefully, but with a force meant to impress and manipulate. Her hands slapped the concrete. Her voice cracked in a practiced way. "Mother," she cried, "please, help me, help my child." Evan stepped closer behind me, startled. He moved to my side slowly, unsure whether to confront her or retreat. He had never seen a grown woman collapse like that, much less the woman who had given him life and taken it away in the same breath. His uncertainty radiated behind my shoulder, but I kept my eyes on Sarah because old wounds know exactly where to reopen. She reached for the hem of my jeans as if grabbing the legs of a savior. "Please," she repeated, "my daughter is dying. Grace is dying. She needs help. I do not know where else to go." For a moment, I let the words hover between us. They carried weight, but not all weight is sincere. Her fingers trembled against the fabric of my pants, but her eyes, those sharp, observant eyes, lifted again to scan my home. I could see the calculation happening behind them. She was assessing my lawn, the car Evan fixed up for me, even the mailbox. She wanted to see if there was money here. Not love, money. I bent down slightly, not enough to touch her, but enough to see her face clearly. "What happened to Grace?" I asked. Sarah sniffed hard, a sound too tidy to belong to real grief. "Her kidneys," she said. "They are failing. She needs a transplant, immediately. They tested the family. No one matched. And then they said," she paused, squeezing her eyes shut as though the moment deserved theatrics, "they said her half-sibling could be a match." Evan inhaled sharply behind me, and I felt him sway just a little. He knew he had a sibling out there, he just never expected to be summoned for them like a tool. "They need him," Sarah whispered. "They need Evan. He might be the only chance." I turned to look at him. His expression held no anger, only confusion and something softer hope. Maybe that this woman might have finally come back with a heart instead of an agenda. I placed my hand on his arm gently, then faced her again. "Did you bring the hospital paperwork?" Sarah nodded quickly and scrambled to her feet. From the passenger seat of her car, she grabbed a thin, wrinkled folder and handed it to me. I opened it and read the truth she had not expected to confront. Evan was not a match, not even close. I looked back up at her. "This says Evan cannot donate. Her jaw clenched the moment the words left my mouth, as if she had been punched with disappointment rather than grief. "They must be wrong," she snapped. "Test him again. They said a sibling would match." "They said a parent would match too," I replied evenly. That was when her expression cracked, not with sorrow, but with panic, because the second page of the report spelled it in large, unmistakable letters: biological mother, compatible, 100%. Sarah snatched the paperwork back, flipping through it with frantic eyes until she saw the line herself. She looked at me, then at Evan, then back down as though reading might change the truth printed on the page. "No," she whispered, "I cannot do that. I cannot ruin my body. I cannot have scars. They said the incision, Mother. I cannot." Her voice rose into a sharp, selfish pitch. "I am not giving up my body for anyone, not even for her own child." That was the moment Evan understood who she truly was. The moment I saw the light dim in his eyes, not from pain, but from clarity. And I knew then that her kneeling had never been about love. It had been about desperation, wrapped in vanity. A performance for an audience she thought she could still manipulate. But the show was over. For a long moment, the porch fell silent after Sarah declared she would not let her body be ruined for her own daughter's life. Evan stood behind me, breathing unevenly, trying to make sense of a woman who shared his blood, but none of his humanity. His hand brushed my elbow, a silent plea for reassurance, but I did not take my eyes off Sarah. The truth had been cracking at the edges for years, and now it was time for the whole facade to collapse. I straightened my back and said quietly, "Come inside." She hesitated, looking around again, pretending to wipe her tears even though none had actually fallen. Evan followed me into the living room, and Sarah trailed behind with the posture of someone entering a courtroom rather than a home. I walked to my bedroom without a word. My hands shook a little, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment I had waited 20 years for. I opened the top drawer of my dresser and lifted out the small wooden box that had stayed with me through every season of Evan's life. The hinge squeaked the way it always did. Inside, the $100 bill lay exactly where I left it, flattened, preserved, an artifact of cowardice. I carried the box back to the living room and set it on the coffee table between us. Sarah eyed it suspiciously, her body shifting, as if she sensed something sliding out of her control. "This belongs to you," I said, flipping the lid open. She looked inside, blinked once, then again. "What is that supposed to be?" I picked up the bill and held it between two fingers. "You gave this to me the night you abandoned Evan. You tossed it like trash onto the porch and said, 'I only have $100 for it.'" Her face twitched, but she forced a scoff. "I never said that. You are making things up." I reached into the box again and pulled out the old slip of paper she had left beneath the blanket. The ink had faded, the edges frayed from years of being touched in anger and sorrow. Evan leaned closer, and when he saw the handwriting, he froze completely. I handed the note to Sarah. "This is yours, too." She read the first line, and her eyes widened just slightly before she shoved it back. "That is not mine. Anyone could have written that." Evan took the note before it hit the table. His hands trembled. He read the words silently, but his lips moved as he did. "I am not raising a broken kid." His voice cracked on the last word. He looked at me, then at her, then back at the paper, as if he was trying to reconcile the mother he imagined with the one standing in front of him. "You wrote this," he whispered. Sarah lifted her chin defiantly, ready to spit out another lie, but I had no intention of giving her air to pollute. The doorbell rang. Sarah jerked in surprise. Evan looked at me in confusion. I walked calmly to the door and opened it. My attorney stepped inside, followed by two people Sarah did not expect to see in this lifetime. One was a woman in her 50s, wearing scrubs and a badge from the county hospital. The other was my longtime neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who lived 2 houses down and remembered everything a little too clearly for Sarah's comfort. The moment Sarah saw them, her face went pale. "What are they doing here?" she demanded. I folded my hands in front of me. "Answering questions you have avoided for 20 years. My attorney introduced the nurse. "This is Miss Daniels." She was working the night Evan was born. Miss Daniels stepped forward, her voice steady and calm, the way people sound when they have nothing to hide. I remember you well, Sarah. You were loud. You were angry. The baby failed the first physical test, and you said, "If something is wrong with it, I am leaving it here." I stood next to you when you told the doctor to sign the surrender papers. That is a lie, Sarah shouted, but her voice cracked, betraying her. Mr. Thompson stepped in next. And I remember the night you dropped Evan on your mother's porch. I was outside checking my truck. Saw your headlights, saw you put the basket down. Heard you say, "Let her deal with this mess." Sarah shook her head violently. You people are making this up. All of you. My attorney opened a folder and placed several printed pages on the coffee table. These are CPS reports from your county. They document 3 separate neglect complaints involving your daughter Grace. Sarah lunged for the papers, but Evan reached them first. He flipped through them slowly. Photos, notes, dates. Missed dialysis appointments for Grace. Receipts of shopping sprees made with the hospital stipend meant for treatment. Text messages where Sarah complained about babysitting a sick kid. He dropped the papers as if they burned him. My attorney continued. The hospital confirmed you withdrew money allocated for Grace's medical care. All of it was spent on travel, cosmetic procedures, and personal purchases. Stop, Sarah whispered, her voice suddenly small. Stop talking. But Miss Daniels stepped forward one more time. I am the nurse who took Evan from your arms when you signed the surrender. You said, "If it is disabled, I am done." I have never forgotten those words. The room fell silent. Evan sank slowly onto the couch, his face hollow, his eyes fixed on the woman who gave birth to him. Sarah's breath came in sharp bursts, her lies collapsing like rotten beams under the weight of truth. Get out, I said finally, my voice quiet but unshakable. Get out of my house, and do not come back. For a long moment after the evidence hit the table, the room felt unnaturally still. Sarah's breath came in sharp jerks, her face twisting between rage and panic, grief and calculation, all the emotions of someone trying to salvage a mask that had already shattered. Evan sat on the edge of the couch, silently absorbing the truth that had been hidden from him since birth. My attorney, the nurse, and Mr. Thompson stood calmly, waiting for whatever storm Sarah had left in her. It came fast. She shot to her feet, pointed at Evan, and screamed so loudly that the windows seemed to vibrate. I created you. I gave you life. You owe me. Her voice rose higher with each word, shrill and violent, not the cry of a mother but the howl of someone who believed ownership was the same as love. I carried you. I birthed you. You are mine. Mine. Evan did not flinch. He had been shaken earlier, but now something inside him had solidified, a spine forged from 20 years of truth. He raised his hands slowly, signing with perfect clarity, each gesture sharp, steady, unshaking. I do not owe the person who left me on a porch with $100. Her face turned a mottled red. Do not use that hand language at me. Look at me when I speak. He signed again, slower this time so she could read the meaning even if she could not read the language. I owe love to the person who stayed, not to the one who ran. I stepped forward, placing myself beside him. You want a debt? I asked her quietly. Then pay yours. You abandoned a newborn. You walked away from responsibility at every turn, and now you stand here demanding loyalty from the one person you have never given anything to. She shook her head violently. No, no. You manipulated him. You turned him against me. You think you are so holy, so noble, raising another woman's mistake. The words hit me harder than I expected, but I did not let them break the surface of my voice. He was never a mistake. He was abandoned. There is a difference. I did what I had to do, she screamed. I had a life to build, a future. I could not drag around a sick baby and throw away my chances. You did throw something away, I replied softly, but it was not your chances. Her chest rose and fell in erratic bursts. She looked at Evan again, and something ugly twisted through her expression, an envy only a mother who failed could feel when staring at the child who survived in spite of her. You think you're better than me, she spat. You think your crippled legs and your charity upbringing make you superior? I made you. You are mine. Evan shook his head slowly. I am not yours, he signed. I never was. That was the breaking point. Sarah let out a sound somewhere between a scream and a sob, grabbed the CPS papers from the table and tore them, shredding them with frantic, desperate fingers. You cannot use this against me. You cannot. This means nothing. All of you mean nothing. My attorney stepped forward. Those are copies, he said calmly. The originals are already filed. Sarah whirled on him. I will sue all of you. I will tell the police you are forcing Evan to give up his kidney. I will say you are letting my daughter die. Her hysteria filled every corner of the room, a storm made of lies and fear and the final collapse of a life built on deception. But my attorney did not raise his voice. He simply opened his briefcase and withdrew a single sheet of paper. Tennessee law is very clear, he said. Organ donation is voluntary. No one can be forced. Not a stranger, not a relative, and certainly not the child you abandoned at birth. You have no legal standing to demand anything. She stared at him, her lips trembling around words she could not form. He continued, each word delivered with the precision of a gavel. You refuse to donate your own kidney, despite being the only compatible match, despite being the parent legally, ethically, and biologically responsible. Any claim you attempt to file will be dismissed immediately. Sarah staggered back a step as if the truth had struck her physically. You are out of options, he said. And you are out of lies. Her knees buckled. Not in performance, not theatrically, not this time. Her legs gave out for a moment, and she sank onto the edge of the rug, barely catching herself with shaking hands. All the bravado melted, all the entitlement drained, leaving only a woman who had finally hit the wall she spent her whole life pretending did not exist. Evan watched her, not with hatred, but with distant sorrow, the kind you feel when a stranger collapses, not a mother. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He leaned into it slightly, steadying himself, and whispered the smallest sound, a shaky exhale that said more than words ever could. Sarah covered her face, sobbing, rocking, muttering incoherent fragments that broke apart as soon as they left her lips. She had been stripped of every shield she brought to my door. The real woman was finally exposed, and she was nothing like the mother Evan once hoped she might be. The house felt unbearably quiet after Sarah collapsed to the floor, but it was not the peaceful kind of silence. It was the silence that comes after someone has finally run out of lies. Evan remained beside me, his breathing steady now, his hands folded together tightly in his lap. My attorney waited in the corner with calm professionalism. The nurse and neighbor stood by the door, and Sarah, the woman who spent her entire life running from accountability, stared at the floor like it was the only thing left that would tolerate her presence. Then the knock came. It was firm, official, unmistakable, the kind that carries authority behind it. Evan straightened. Sarah stiffened. I walked toward the door because deep inside, I knew the moment had arrived. When I opened it, 2 CPS officers and a social worker stepped inside with solemn expressions. They did not come for questions this time. They came with decisions. The lead social worker, Miss Perez, stepped forward holding a folder thicker than any I had ever seen. Her voice was calm but unyielding. Sarah Miller, she said. We are here regarding your daughter, Grace. Sarah scrambled to her feet, wiping her face with the back of her hand, her panic rising instantly. Is she okay? Is she worse? I have been trying to help her. They are lying. She pointed at us wildly as though flinging blame might work like magic. Miss Perez did not even blink. We have reviewed medical documents, financial records, and multiple testimonies, she said, including evidence you delayed Grace's transplant evaluation. You withheld treatment. You diverted medical funds for personal use. And you refused to proceed with the medically recommended kidney donation despite being the only viable match. Sarah shook her head so hard her hair whipped across her face. No, that is not fair. I needed time. I needed help. You endangered her life, Miss Perez continued, cutting cleanly through her excuses. This constitutes medical neglect, abuse by omission, and reckless endangerment of a minor. Sarah's knees buckled again, but this time she caught herself on the arm of the sofa. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. She is my baby. Miss Perez opened the folder. We are issuing an emergency removal order. Effective immediately. Child Protective Services is taking custody of Grace Miller. Sarah let out a sound I had never heard from her before, something raw and animalistic. She threw herself toward the officers, grabbing their pant legs, clawing like a person drowning in their own consequences. No, no, please, she is all I have. Please do not take her. I stepped forward, not out of pity but out of long-awaited clarity. Sarah, I said quietly, you left one child on a porch because he was not perfect. You neglected the other because she was inconvenient. Love is not a feeling. It is a choice. And you chose yourself every single time. She shook her head violently. You do not understand. Grace needs me. No, I answered. Grace needs a mother. You only needed an accessory. Her face contorted, but the truth hit her like a slap. She lunged for me then, grabbing at my skirt, screaming, Please! You are her grandmother. Tell them I can keep her. I looked down at her with the kind of calm I had earned through decades of pain. I raised the child you threw away. I will not defend the choices that are taking the other one from you. The officers gently but firmly lifted her arms from their legs. She fought, twisting, sobbing, begging. Grace is my daughter. She is mine. Miss Perez exchanged a glance with the second officer before speaking again. Mrs. Miller, custody has already been arranged with a suitable family. Sarah froze. What family? She whispered. The front door opened again, and a couple walked inside, nervous but determined. The man held his hat tightly in his hands. The woman clutched a folder filled with paperwork and photographs. I recognized them immediately, though Sarah clearly did not. It took her several seconds before the shock hit. It was Grace's paternal grandparents. The same people Sarah once mocked for being uneducated lowlifes, the same ones she refused to let Grace visit more than twice a year, the same people she belittled for not being good enough to marry into. They now stood determined and heartbreakingly hopeful. The grandmother spoke first. We already petitioned for emergency guardianship, she said softly. We have the room ready. We have the resources. And we have the love. Sarah's mouth fell open. No, she shrieked. No, you cannot give her to them. They are nobodies. The grandfather stepped closer, his voice steady. Grace deserves a mother, Sarah screamed. I am her mother. The grandmother shook her head gently. No, you were just the woman she was born from. Sarah became a storm, a hurricane of denial and desperation. No, no, you cannot take her. She is mine, the CPS officer answered with the finality of a gavel. Grace will be safer, healthier, and loved in their care. The court agrees. Sarah's cries turned into violent sobs, her body convulsing as the officers lifted her to her feet. She tried to grab onto anything: furniture, walls, the edges of her own collapsing lies, but nothing could hold her up anymore. As they led her out, she screamed so loudly the windows rattled. Grace! Grace! She is my daughter! I will get her back! You cannot do this to me! But the grandmother stepped forward one last time and said with devastating compassion, Grace deserves a mother, and you never chose to be one. The officers closed the police car door. Sarah's screams were cut off mid-syllable. Silence filled the yard. Justice, after 20 long years, finally had a sound. After the patrol car carrying Sarah disappeared down the road and the officers finished their paperwork, the house finally exhaled. Evan and I stood in the doorway together, watching the dust settle, both of us exhausted in a way that felt older than our bones. Justice has a strange sound. It is not loud, it is not triumphant. It is a quiet, steady release, the way a wound stops bleeding once the infection is finally cut out. Evan leaned against the doorframe, staring into the space where Sarah had been dragged away, and I could see the whirlwind of thoughts moving behind his eyes. I reached up and touched his arm gently. You okay? I asked. He nodded, though the nod was slow and heavy. I think so, he said. It hurts, but it also feels right. That was the first honest description either of us managed to speak. Life did not snap back into place overnight. Wounds do not close just because the storm has passed. But over the following months, something remarkable began to grow in the empty spaces Sarah left behind. Evan applied to a local training program for physical therapy, specifically one focused on assisting young patients with disabilities. He said he wanted to help kids the way so many therapists had helped him. Watching him come home with his textbooks, his notebooks full of anatomical sketches, and that determined glimmer in his eyes made me feel something I had not allowed myself to feel in decades: pride that did not hurt. He worked harder than any student I had ever seen. He studied late into the night, attended every clinical session, volunteered at pediatric clinics even when he was not required to. He understood those children the way only someone who had lived their struggles could. He knelt next to them, encouraged them, laughed with them, and celebrated their smallest victories as though they were monumental. One of the supervising therapists told me, "He has something you cannot teach, empathy in his hands." I knew exactly where it came from. It came from surviving abandonment, from enduring surgeries, from learning to walk with braces, from being loved without condition. He carried all of it into every child he helped. Meanwhile, Grace settled into her new home, the home with the paternal grandparents Sarah had always dismissed. They treated her with a tenderness that was both gentle and fierce. They learned her medication schedule by heart, took her to every appointment, sat through every consultation, and rearranged their entire lives around her healing without a single complaint. They did not ask whether she deserved love. They simply gave it. The judge granted them full guardianship, and under their care, Grace's health improved more steadily than anyone predicted. The doctors were hopeful. She was receiving every treatment on time, her lab numbers were stabilizing, and the specialists believed she now had a strong chance of getting onto the transplant program list once her condition was controlled. I asked the grandparents early on if I could see her from time to time. I did not want to impose. I did not want to confuse her. I just wanted her to know that even though her mother had failed her, the world had not. They agreed, with warmth that felt genuine. So once every month, I drove to their modest little home on the edge of town. I brought coloring books, puzzles, sometimes a doll with soft yarn hair. Grace was shy at first, unsure how much of me she should trust, but children recognize sincerity faster than adults do. Slowly, she opened up. She began to show me her drawings, took my hand when she walked around the yard, asked me questions in a small voice that trembled less each time. She told me about her favorite nurses and her new school and the neighbor's cat she wanted to adopt someday. She smiled more each visit, and every smile felt like a small miracle stitched back into the world. One afternoon, after one of those visits, Evan and I sat on our porch. The sun was setting in the orange way Tennessee does best, slow and soft like a warm sigh. Evan rested his elbows on his knees and watched the sky change colors. He did not speak for a long time, and neither did I. The silence between us was comfortable now, healed, familiar. Then he turned to me, eyes full and steady, and said, "Grandma, I am alive because you refused to give up on me. You did not let me stay broken. You did not let me feel unwanted. Everything I am is because you stayed." The words struck me harder than I was ready for. My throat tightened, and I felt tears forming despite trying to blink them back. I reached over and took his hand, not because he needed the comfort, but because I did. "Evan," I whispered, "raising you saved me as much as it saved you." He smiled, squeezing my fingers gently. "People always say parents give children life," he said. "But you gave me love. That is bigger." I looked at him then, really looked at him. The strong jaw, the quiet determination, the warmth he carried like a light he never asked for, but learned to keep burning. And I realized the truth I had lived for 20 years, but never said out loud. "Not everyone who gives birth is a mother," I said softly. "A mother is the one who stays." He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks without shame. And as the sun finished setting, as night settled over our little porch and cicadas began their song, I felt something gentle and long overdue settle into my chest. We were a family again. Not the one Sarah fled from, not the one she tried to destroy, but the one we rebuilt from honesty, loyalty, and love. A family formed not by blood alone, but by who remained when everyone else walked away. If my story reminded you of your own strength, your own survival, or perhaps the loved ones who held you together when life tried to break you apart, then I am grateful you spent this time with me. These stories are not easy to tell, but sometimes the truth deserves a voice, especially the quiet truths that live too long in the shadows. If you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of resilience, betrayal, justice, and the quiet kind of love that saves lives, then I hope you will stay with me a little longer. Go ahead and subscribe to Grandma True Stories. It helps more than you know, and it keeps these stories alive for the next heart that needs them. Thank you for listening. This is Nancy, and until next time, remember this: the world may forget, but grandmothers never do.